About the connection between. Okay, well, Janet, I can't see. So you have to tell me when it's up on the screen.
You're on now. I don't know what there was a little weirdness with the connection on that video, so I hope we don't have too many issues playing videos tonight, but I don't know why that was.
Okay, so should I read?
No, we're on right now, live.
Okay. Welcome to another night with Late Nights with Lenin. So we're going to start with an excellent question. So this week we discovered that Bill Kristol, the neocon, wrote some sort of a letter, something about protecting democracy. And guess who's one of the co-signers of this Bill Kristol letter? None other than Noam Chomsky. Come on, like, you should know better than to you should just be blind and not sign anything authored by the, what do you call it? PNAC Center. What does PNAC stand for? It was a neocon center. I can't remember their name, but they had Project for a New American Century. And Noam Chomsky should know better than this. But anyways, it brought up a great question. Somebody asked, what is the connection between neocons and Trotskyites? Is that tweet up yet? Janet?
What? You didn't give me a tweet to put up? Hold on.
Oh, I did. No. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I tagged you on a tweet. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I'll throw it up in a second.
Oh, so sorry. I thought I tagged you about that we would address it, but I'm sorry. I must have not done that. I apologize. Life is hard when you have ADHD.
It's all right. We'll get it on now.
Okay.
We have all night.
Yes, we are spending the whole night. What? Lenin. But it's an important question, and there's no way I can answer it via just one tweet. Where is it? Okay, I see. I did tag you, but you didn't respond, so I should have. Okay, got it. Okay, here we go. Let me WhatsApp it to you. Okay. Anyways, so Noam Chomsky was caught, and the thing is that Noam Chomsky is like this little mosquito. At first, you think, okay, it's weird how you can go from just like he's like a little mosquito where you think he's not even like, okay, you think he's mostly harmless to then being, oh my God, he's such an annoying person. I can't stand him. It's a quick transformation, and it just happens. And I'm at that phase where he'll hopefully go back to being a mosquito to me. But right now he's at the, oh my God, he's like the malaria carrying mosquito. kind of person right now to me. So you're just going to have to bear with me when I'm going through my anti-Chomsky phase. But yeah, you'll see a lot of these things where he's just glaringly wrong. In fact, he supports almost every color revolution while it's going on, but then 20 years later, he might just say, oh, that was bad. Like he did with Serbia. He had conspiracy theories about Russians with nuclear backpacks. But I digress. Did we get the tweet up yet?
Yeah, I had it up, but hold on, I'll put it back up.
Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't know we had it up yet.
No, I'll put it. I was waiting for you to be done,
Okay.
and I put it up, and then
It said, I have yet to figure out what it is about being a trot that leads them towards becoming a neocon. Bizarre. Well, it's really easy if you understand what Trotsky was and how he differed from the Mensheviks. So, the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks differed in that the Bolsheviks were like, the Bolsheviks did not want to wait until Russia became a super industrialized society and then after all the rural population empties out into the urban place and then do a revolution, because Lenin's theory was that if we wait that long, we're never going to have a revolution. And the Mensheviks, on the other hand, wanted to didn't trust the rural peasantry and wanted to ally with the liberal bourgeoisie to first have overthrow the czar and then have capitalism for the next 50 to 100, God knows how long, and then overthrow capitalism. Well, Trotsky was a Menshevik in that he fundamentally did not trust the peasant and he did not want to have a revolution at that moment in time. But he had a unique idea, not new, but a unique idea. So they foresaw a lot of things, like what about the counter-revolution from Europe? What about the Britons, the French, the Americans, the whatever else, Germans? They're all going to invade us because they're going to be upset. They foresaw all of that. Well, so Lenin's solution to that was we just get our rural peasantry and we're going to organize them into the Red Army and they will fight off the 14 different empires that will invade, which they did. And Trotsky's idea was that Russia, as soon as they overthrew the Tsar, they should go and agitate Western European proletariat, like start a war with Western Europe and the Western European proletariat to like liberate them or something like that. And then the idea was that the Western European proletariat would come and rescue them. And the reason why Trotsky had this idea, it's not as stupid as it sounds right now, because Russia had about 2 million proletariats and about 100 million peasantry. So, and they did not actually have enough proletarians to have a dictatorship of the proletarians. So Trotsky's idea was to borrow some of Western Europe's proletarian to defend the revolution against the reactionaries. But of course, Lenin would have told you that you can't trust white people, Western Europeans, to not side with their bourgeoisie, which they did overwhelmingly in World War I. So now, if you have the idea of agitating a war in order to install socialism, you just need to change that metrics in your head to capitalism, and it'll work even better. So that's why there's a big Trotskyite to neocon pipeline, because they will use the same methodology, but instead of trying to, install socialism, they just will use it as a weapon of capitalism. And that's exactly what they did. So that's why we see such a big pipeline between Trotskyites and neocons. By the way, please become a paid subscriber. We love getting super chats. We get super excited when we get super chats. The more the merrier. But today we'll have Doug Henwood. We'll talk a lot about how much we hate liberals. We'll bash Hillary Clinton. We'll also talk a little bit about what's missing from the modern monetary theory critique, except for Fadil Kaboub, who we both love. Well, I don't know if Doug loves Fadil Kaboub, but I love Fadil Kaboub. But I hope Doug will one day love. Wait, that makes no sense. We'll worry about this later. And after our interview with Doug Henwood, we're going to have me reading a little. So just so you understand a little bit more of what was going on and what Lenin was thinking, I've read a few chapters of Lenin's wife's book, Nadezhda Remembers. And so we're going to have a special reading of that right after Doug Henwood. And then we'll be back for gossip questions, trolling bread tubers, anything else you have. So today we have Doug Henwood with us. We've already had him for Historically in the Past. And we've discussed the origins of modern auto-liberalism and neoliberalism. And recently, Doug has gotten himself into a bit of a Twitter war with the MMTers. And since I understand both the MMTers' point of view and Doug's point of view, I thought I would get Doug on to ask some questions. So, Doug, can you explain the difference between, I guess, the Marxist point of view of the class struggle versus, I guess, the liberal point of view?
Well, I don't know if the liberals have a point of view on the class struggle. They think we're all just, they believe in consensus and reason. But fundamentally, liberals believe in elite rule and really are terrified of the mob. So I don't really think that they have a very favorable position on class struggle and would like it just to go away. They don't want to think about it. I would say, Marxists think that class struggle is the motor of history. And since we're talking about MMT, I would say that they really have a minimal consideration of class. I don't really see that it enters into their considerations very significantly. They don't have any sense of production, ownership, inequalities of wealth and power, all the things that really make capitalism what it is. They have a very, what I think is naive view of money as just a creature of the state without much of a class struggle view of what that stands for.
Okay, I happen to agree with you on this stance. For example, while the money is the creature of the state is a creature of the class struggle. And for example, we've seen for the past 40 years, 70 years, 80 years, we have seen the IMF, the World Bank, that kind of limit the sovereignty of other countries. And then there's, of course, the blackmail where it's like, oh, you want pharmaceutical medicines? Well, you have to privatize everything kind of thing. So it seems like there's another step to go on top of it where you have to kind of understand why some states can print money whenever they want, like the US or UK, and other states have a little bit of a more issues.
Yeah, well, just speaking of the class rule in the state, I mean, just what we're seeing now with the battle over the budget, Biden's social spending proposal, which is large by American standards, but not large by world standards. The senators who are blocking it really are doing the work of the plutocrat class. And they are very adamant that they don't want to give an inch. They don't want to see any kind of social spending. They like to keep the working class, as the Brits say, on the back foot all the time. But yes, I think there's very underexamined in MMT. And I have to admit, I've stopped reading literature. After I finished that Jacobin piece, I kind of wanted a break from MMT and the relentless polemics around it. For a while,
you're the subject of like all of it.
I know, they really hate me. It's funny. I remember once Harold Bloom, the late English professor, had in the back of one of his books, I think it was a dust jacket copy. He said, as energizing as it is to be denounced, he also wanted to be admired. And I feel that way sometimes. It's energizing to be denounced, but also I want to be loved and admired as well. But one of the things that I thought was very underexamined in the MMT literature was the imperial privilege of the United States issuing the reserve currency, the world currency, which is backed by a couple of things. One, U.S. wealth. I mean, the fact that this is an enormous economy and that you can buy so much here. Our financial markets are so large that it's very easy to just dump $1 billion into the treasury market and no one would notice. But ultimately, it's all backed by the political and military power of the United States. That is the ultimate backing of the dollar. The fact that we could pretty much destroy most countries of the world. We couldn't easily destroy China or Russia because they have a lot of nuclear weapons. But, countries without nuclear weapons or countries with few, the United States could just level them in a half hour. And, it's fun to watch all the agonizing over Iran's nuclear program now, because the United States knows that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it can't push it around so easily anymore. Same with North Korea. So, yeah, I think that's the ultimate backing for the U.S. dollar is the massive size of the U.S. military and the U.S. arsenal.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people don't seem to understand how, I guess, the U.S. dollar interacts abroad. Like, for example, I was just looking at this yesterday, where, like, in 1999 or 2000, I believe, maybe Clinton had something called the Millennium Fund Challenge for Development in Africa. Do you remember that?
Was that part of the UN's Millennial Development Goals?
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Okay.
Jeffrey Sachs is really high on that stuff.
Okay. Well, what happened is that they allegedly gave all this money to build some ports and some highways in Senegal, but that never came to fruition. But yesterday I checked, and China and Senegal did a treaty in 2014. And I guess, and now, like, Senegal has really brand new highways and really nice ports.
This is all part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese. Yeah.
So it's kind of like almost as if the corruption or it is there to just keep them deindustrialized. I was wondering, what do you think about that?
I mean, the U.S. interest in keeping the rest?
Yeah.
Well, or industrialize only on U.S. terms in a subordinate way, and not to be a serious competitor. And it's really amazing to watch China now just throw around all this money around the Belt and Road Initiative. And as the U.S. steps back for a combination of imperial exhaustion and insolvency, it's amazing to see China step in. And so far, I doubt this is going to last forever, but so far they've offered or required far less conditionality for this expenditure of this money than the U.S. or U.S.-backed institutions like the IMF and World Bank have historically. The Chinese are clearly building what could someday be the infrastructure of an empire. But right now, they're not really pushing around the recipient countries the way the U.S. did historically. That may change. China is not, run by angels either. But it's just if you're a poor country and China offers to build some roads and ports and railroads for you, what are you going to do? Say no?
So I guess I'm trying to understand. When you say industrialized on the U.S. terms, like, what do you mean? Just trying to...
Well, certain industries were favored. For example, the United States wanted poor countries to manufacture textiles.
Because the U.S. is the largest producer of raw cotton.
Yeah, but also we used to make all the machinery too. We could sell them. Capital equipment, we could sell them. But what the U.S. didn't want was a competitor. And so, if you go back to the end of World War II and the Marshall Plan, the U.S. quite consciously wanted to reindustrialize Europe after the devastation of World War II. And it wasn't so much concerned at that point about funding competitors because they just thought that we needed a fairly healthy set of rich countries that could trade with each other in the Northern Hemisphere. But after that, no other country was going to get U.S. money or loans from U.S.-backed institutions like the World Bank unless they were willing to be completely subordinated to U.S. development policy. And in the 60s and 70s, it was somewhat looser. then it got really very tight and neoliberal and full of conditions in the 80s. But there was never the kind of freewheeling development that the U.S. allowed in Western Europe and then later Japan. Of course, then Europe and Japan came to be considerable competitors to the United States in the 70s, especially the auto industry in Japan in the 70s and 80s. But by then, it was a little too late to do much about it.
Just curious, like it seems like I read a few other articles about this, but it seems like Japan kind of and China have switched places between the 80s and now. Like what's happened in the past 30 years?
Well, it's funny. Some of the anti-Chinese stuff you hear now, if you were around in the, especially in the early 1980s, when Detroit was just completely on its back and the U.S. auto industry was devastated, there was an awful lot of really anti-Japanese sentiment. And that was also a time when the U.S. was borrowing a lot of money from China. We had from Japan, rather, and a very large trade deficit with Japan. And there are a lot of people in the U.S. at that point who were convinced that Japan was going to eat our lunch and send us the bill for it. And that, as the 80s went on, that threat got magnified, the hostility deepened, and then Japan had a big crash in the early 90s. And, they've recovered in some sense, but they never became the formidable competitor that they were or we thought that they were back 30, 40 years ago. But now China is taking that role. So you're seeing China having gone from being a rather subordinate, low in the food chain assembler of basic products, stuffing circuit boards and making textiles and, just doing low value added, low skilled industrial work. China has now gotten a lot more sophisticated, and they've developed their own very substantial technical capacities in consumer electronics, capital equipment. But now we also see with this hypersonic missile, whatever that is, they're developing a considerable military capability as well. So there's, both in elite circles, there's a lot of worry about China, but there's also a lot of popular hostility to China, and they're being blamed for the material woes of much of the American working class. And Trump did a very good job of playing on that with a really heavy dose of xenophobia. He clearly has a visceral hatred of Chinese people, and it seems Latin Americans as well. But he was playing on something that is real, both in elite opinion and in popular opinion. And now we're seeing Biden continuing a lot of the kind of new Cold War anti-China policies without that vitriol, without that naked racism that Trump exhibited. But fundamentally, the policies are the same. They view China as a threat and needs an economic threat, political threat, and military threat that needs to be contained.
So is that what they're doing it seems like they're provoking people in the South China Sea, and I never understood the strategy behind it.
Well, who, China or the U.S.?
U.S., of course.
Well, China is, making claims about the South China Sea. And I think the islands that are involved are likely to sink as the seas rise. So they're not really very strategically important, but it's become a site of an ego war between the declining power and the rising power. And I remember I read some of Hillary's memoir of her time as Secretary of State. It was just an unreadable book.
Oh my God. I tried reading some of it because she said nobody likes Bernie, and I was writing an article for it and then to see who she praised. And I almost flipped my lid when she praised Karimov, who was the Uzbekistani dictator who, what did he do? He I don't want to say it's so gross, but the less gross thing is he boiled people alive, but he also did other gross things. And so I tried reading it, but I couldn't get through that.
Yeah. Well, it was full of outrages. The stuff she said about Honduras, there was something, actually, she promoted the coup in Honduras, and the paperback, she edited out the Honduras passage, which is pretty interesting. But it was an extraordinarily dull book for the most part. There was just nothing. She's a very dull person.
You wrote a book about her called My Turn. Can you talk about it real quick?
Hillary Clinton targets the presidency. Yes. I'm personally responsible. The MMTers hate me, and also Hillary people hate me because I'm personally responsible for Donald Trump having won the election. But yeah,
everyone is, though, except Hillary.
Yeah, she nobody, awful lot of people really just don't like her. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was I told all these liberals at that time I was on this semi-secret email discussion list for elite liberal pundits. I don't know. I was invited on as a diversity hire, and one of the things I told them was, "You're going to regret your love of Hillary. She's a terrible candidate. Nobody likes her, and she could well lose." And I turned out to be right. But she has so little to recommend her. I couldn't understand the love that people had for her.
I cannot either. It's like somebody said this about Theresa May. It's like they want a cult of personality for somebody without a personality.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah, there is a cult. I didn't know that Theresa May had a cult around her. I know Hillary.
I don't think she did, but it was funny because that's kind of but that describes Hillary Clinton even better than it does Theresa May.
Oh God, yes. There is a cult around her, and it still exists.
I know. Yesterday, oh my God! Yesterday, somebody wrote this this article about how Hillary is fat, but she deserves it.
Oh, I saw that on Twitter. Like, oh my God, everything about that is just like Twitter dumbness, all distilled in one moment.
Well, it seems this is what I think. A lot of liberal white women, to them, like the only thing they see is, oh my God, my boss was mean to me and screwed me over for a promotion, and so they put them I don't know, they try to live vicariously through Hillary Clinton. But for women who are not liberal or who maybe from other countries, or we're like, oh my God, she cackled while she killed the only Gaddafi. That's scary. And that's where well,
actually, there's a Harvard Business School professor whose name escapes me now, who wrote a little paper right after the 2016 election in which she pointed out that Hillary reminded a lot of working class people of their human resource manager HR department. That there's this kind of finger wagging, punitive,
yes,
lecturing attitude around her. But mixed with all that diversity talk, that fake diversity talk, that really puts an awful lot of people off. And if you're not a member of that same class, you can't really understand that contempt. But the reason I brought up her book was that there are passages in there where she talks about the Chinese threat and the way we needed to, as she put it, to pivot to Asia. She kept talking about the pivot to Asia.
What is that supposed to mean?
Away from Europe and paying more attention to containing China is what that means. But at one point, she quotes a Chinese diplomat or maybe senior government official, I can't remember who, as saying to her, "Why don't you just pivot your way out of here?" And that was the best line I read in the book. Just pivot your way out of here.
Okay, we're gonna pull that up. So I think I've picked the right piece because Lenin has a lot to say about liberals, and what you notice is that very little has changed with liberals from back then and now.
This is a fortunate coincidence because I saw a truck just down the street from my apartment the other day, on the door it called itself the Lenin Express.
Oh my! You should have taken a picture.
I did take a picture. I posted it to Twitter.
Okay, great. Express. Okay, I'm gonna go hunt it. Is it in Brooklyn? You're in Brooklyn, right? I live in Manhattan now. Okay, this is a short one, but this is about frank speeches by a liberal, where the liberal kind of lets out. And this is kind of funny because, often once in a while, liberals accidentally leave the cat out of the bag or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, my favorite was a guy in Clinton's National Security Council who said, "Democracy only works when there's fundamental agreement in the nature of property."
Okay, I'm going to find this. That is funny because that's literally the opposite of a democracy.
Yeah, no, but every now and then, like you say, they do let the cat out of the bag.
And I think that's their number one concern with Trump, is that he'd let the cat out of the bag too often, like when he was like, "Oh, we should just steal their oil in Venezuela," or whatever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things wrong with Trump, but I think that was to a lot of refined opinion, that was his great offense.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
It's okay. I will do the Russian names. V.M. Stablevsky,
editor of Ruskaya Vedomosti.
Yeah.
Recently passed away. The liberals honored him as a staunch progressive figure. Boy, that sounds like it come out of today's papers, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's kind
like
of
Ruth Bader Ginsburg or something,
or Colin Powell. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, that was.
He literally confessed to torching villages in his book, and I'm like, how dare you guys? Okay.
Well, they were very stressed. They spoke and wrote of his personal qualities. They avoided the question of the political trend, followed by Ruskaya Vedomosti. There is nothing more convenient for our liberals than the ancient colorless general haziness. That's nice. Lenin was often a really good writer.
He's a great writer.
Yeah, I really enjoy reading him every now and then. I have to say, then despite all my reservations about Trotskyism, Trotsky was a pretty good writer too.
Oh, Trotsky was a great speaker and a great writer, but Trotskyism, on the other hand, there's an old joke where they say that if you have 100 members in a Trotskyite party, 1 year later, there will be 100 parties with one member each.
Yeah, or maybe 105, because they would split among themselves. Oppositionism, progressivism. What is hidden behind these words, what sort of oppositional activity was displayed by an individual, which class he served, are things they prefer not to discuss. These things are distasteful to liberals.
Yep.
Democracy, however, should try to establish the truth. Honor V.M. Sobolevsky. Who was this guy? Just an editor?
He was the editor of Ruskaya Vedomosti, which is a cadet newspaper. So cadets were literally constitutional Democrats, exactly like the Democratic Party, except you remove the constitutional and then they're identical.
They honored him as a progressive. That is, you're right. But if you really want to teach politics to the people, do not forget the trend followed by Ruskaya Vedomosti. That provides a unique combination of right cadetism and Narodnik overtones. I'm just not up on my
Narodniks are the other kind
Russian
of
Revolution
liberal.
taxonomy.
Hold on. Narodniks are the other type of liberals. So basically, Narodniks were like kind of pandering to the rural peasantry, but then they will. In order to overthrow the Tsar, their idea was, let's get together with the cadets and do it. And Lenin's like, no, let's not. That's if we wait on the liberals, they're never going to overthrow the Tsar.
They're not into overthrowing,
Exactly.
And they were so rude. I mean, killing the Romanovs, that was just extremely bad taste. Mr. L. Pantaleov, who published in Rech an article to the memory of V.M. Sobolevsky, wrote that he was a great skeptic in respect to the availability of the forces possessed by our progressive society. What does that mean? Nothing here is definite. What sort of skepticism was it? What society is he talking about? These are all very good questions. The curtain is drawn back slightly by the words of V.M. Sobolevsky that Mr. Pantalev quotes. What has a society to offer that in the mass is saturated to the marrow of its bones with the tradition and habits of serfdom? What support for a new system is to be expected from millions of semi-slaves, beggars, starving people, drunkards, and ignoramuses? Wow, that's
a fair question to even ask now. The semi-slave part especially seems to have come back.
Mr. Pantalev, who deemed it proper to publish these frank statements, did not notice that the light they cast on the attitude of Russian liberals to democracy. In the summer of 1905, Ruskaya Vedomosti published an article by Mr. Vinogradov, a star of liberal scholarship, arguing that these semi-slaves should not go too far. They should be more modest and calm. I think I mentioned this earlier. My experience on this elite liberal discussion group called the Kabbalist was that, and I don't think this always really comes out in more public forums, that liberals really fear and hate the mob. They think they're a bunch of racist and ignorant bigots. And they prefer rule by elites. That's why they love courts. They love regulation. They love elite expertise. And they really don't want the masses. The masses just shut up and behave, basically.
Well, that's the thing is if you don't have stake in the outcome, you're going to decide sociopathic things. Like if it's not your water that's going to be poisoned, like you'll totally decide, hey, let's frack. I think you need a stake in the outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, they should send Congress live in Flint for a while and drink the water.
Exactly.
Ruskaya Vedomosti, it was probably a little ahead of the other liberal newspapers in declaring quite definitely its counter-revolutionary attitude to events. There is skepticism and skepticism. As far as a public figure is concerned, one should ask, in respect of which class is he a skeptic? Mm-hmm. Sobolevsky in his Ruskaya Vedomosti was a skeptic and even a pessimist in respect of the peasantry. He was an optimist in respect of the landowners. He pictured them as being capable of reforms, as sincerely sympathizing with the new social system, as cultured people, etc. Oh my God! I've been reading a lot about history of American elites, and the Southern slaveholding class was extremely cultured and read a lot of classical literature and looked down on their Yankee counterparts as a bunch of vulgar Arabists. So, cultured people can do very barbaric things.
you should read. Have you read Gustav Meyer's History of the Great American Fortunes?
Oh, no, I need to do that.
I'll send it to you after I have all of it downloaded. But what you realize is a lot of the northern elites that are here now, they're kind of like they still got their money from slavery. And so,
oh God, yes. Well, the Ivy League was founded on slavery, basically. And New York City made a lot of money off the cotton trade. And was very pro Confederacy at first. The mixture of this landowner liberalism, and not semi-slavish, but utterly slavish, neurotism was a sign of the rottenness of the enlightened, well-to-do, satiated liberal society that taught slave morality and slave politics to the millions of semi-slaves who were awakening. The liberal society was, to the marrow of its bones, slavish towards the landowners, and the neurotism of Ruskaya Vidimosti reflects more than anything else the patriarchal Russia of the humble muzhik, what is that? And the landowner flirting with
like
liberalism.
A country folk.
Boy, this certainly sounds like a lot of our liberals who are in awe of rich people.
Yeah.
But the right kind of rich people, the George Soros kind of rich people.
Exactly. And what people don't realize, okay, this is the worst thing about like George Soros himself. He does awful things like coups in Hungary. He's a financial criminal in some random country. But because the right wing puts like anti-Semitic smears upon him, like they think that purifies him into a good person.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they're certainly worse than George Soros, but he's not a good guy. But he funds liberals, so they like him.
Okay, this makes sense. And another thing I've noticed is, liberals do not. They ultimately do not trust the people. I remember reading, what's her name? Amy Choziak. You remember?
Oh, Amy Choziak.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hillary. She's the Hillary correspondent for the Times.
Yes. Well, she talked about the day of the election, where right after she lost, they were talking about all their enemies. And I remember in one of them, they said Amy was like the people of Wisconsin. And it's like, yeah, they literally see the people as their enemy to be subdued, as opposed to like a partner to fight with, right?
Well, yeah, and they certainly don't see the role of capitalism in creating these people that they find so contemptible. I remember in Hillary and the remark about the deplorables.
I remember that remark. Yes.
It could have lost her the election. We don't know, but it certainly didn't help. And I think that there's this deep contempt for the masses, people who didn't go to the right schools and who don't have the right kind of manners. And, it's just a bunch of vulgar and intemperate people who live by instinct and not don't repress their instincts the way elite liberals like to.
I think they do. Well, that explains why they always try to horseshoe, because to them, like all of the masses, whenever they disagree with them, are wrong. So it kind of explains why Hillary thought Bernie and Trump were the same thing. But another thing that I have a theory on is that because she's like done so many coups, especially the one in Ukraine, she kind of feels guilty about it. So I think she was like projecting, because a lot of like organic support to Bernie looked like what she would do during the color revolution.
Yes. Yeah. Ukraine. Well, that's a whole story in itself.
Yeah. Well, she was instrumental. I mean, there was also like, I'm sure there were other countries who probably tried to do color.
Well, there are a whole lot of them, right? Yeah. How many? I've lost count of all the color revolutions and the mapping of the color to the revolution.
Me too. I just remember the first Ukraine was orange.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was green in Iran, right? Wasn't that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was definitely her. Okay, 2009. Now I remember. Yeah. So because you have to put up like a fake social media buzz. So I think. And
they're doing it now in Cuba.
Oh, are they again?
Well, they're creating what and this actually started under Trump, but now it's continued under Biden. But they're trying to create a kind of respectable opposition that's not like screaming reactionary like the Miami Cubans. So they're trying to find like artists and poets who can make it in polite liberal society. And they've been very successful at doing this. And so an awful lot of liberals who would have been alarmed and repelled by trying to overthrow the Cuban government now are really behind it because it's the right kind of people making these noises in Cuba. And they're getting money from the NED and all the usual sources.
That is why they have all these random art. Like I remember reading this one about this artist, and now it makes sense, the singers and the artists. Okay.
Yeah, they have a group. It's called like N27 or something like that. That is where a lot of these people coalesce around, and they're the polite side of the anti-Cuban revolution.
Okay, because like the Miami Gusanos are a little bit too obvious with their I miss my slaves part.
Okay, yes, no, they're just too vulgar and too reactionary. So this kind of polite liberal is just what custom made. And it's like the old CIA used to do back in the 50s. They would appeal to liberals like Gloria Steinem and Partisan Review and all these people by being very high-minded and high culture. Trying to fight
is that why they sponsored art?
Oh, yeah, it was all part. Well, they also wanted to counter the idea of the ugly American. We're just a bunch of money-obsessed Bulgarians. And so they sponsored all this art, poetry, music. It was very sophisticated. You got to respect the fact that they knew what they were doing and did a pretty good job of it. But it was all intended to fight communism.
Wow, that's very interesting because I did not realize this. I just thought they threw money at random stuff. And
there's a great book by Francis Stoner Saunders called The Cultural Cold War that really goes into great detail about all that.
That's good to know. Because like I did not know that. Okay, so now in America, I guess you and I are in a lot of like the agreement with the fact that you're never. Okay, I've gotten maybe a little bit more pessimistic than you. Like, I don't think anything useful is really going to happen inside the imperial core. Like, the best you can do is educate people against.
Well, I'm getting more pessimistic. I'll concede that.
Okay, so the best you can do is like educate people so that once in a while they might try to oppose some ghoulish measure, but it seems like we were always like repeating the same dichotomy, and people seem to be permanently surprised that the Democrats act like Democrats, as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, people always talk about the weakness of they have no spine and all that stuff. But I think the fundamental problem with the Democrats is that they are fundamentally a capitalist party that has to pretend otherwise sometimes. So, and there's certainly a larger force within the party that is kind of progressive, social democratic to some degree. A lot of the progressive caucus of the House would fit that bill. And, they're not bad by American standards. But, the bulk of the party leadership and most of the senatorial delegation is pretty, pro-business, very conservative. And we're seeing it now with the fact that Biden can't get this plan through Congress. But it's also interesting. We're just coming off what we were saying about the liberal fear of the mob. There's been no effort on the part of Biden or the Democrats to sell this plan in any meaningful way. They're not like out there sponsoring rallies.
Because
Biden is
they
not
don't
on
trust
TV.
the people.
They don't trust the people. No, the only way, plutocrats really oppose this legislation. And the only way to counter the policy, the opposition of the plutocrats would be to launch some kind of popular movement.
Yes.
And that is exactly what they don't want. They fear it. They fear they would lose control of it and bad things would happen. So it seems that their paymasters are going to win or largely win this battle precisely because they're so afraid of the people.
Yeah, and we've known this. This is exactly the same formula the Obama White House did with regards to single-payer labor. The rotating villain changes, but the plan does not.
Yeah, there's much more of a progressive force of the Democratic Party now than there was in the Obama years. So that does change the math somewhat. But yeah, it's still fundamentally that kind of party that they're afraid of being too radical and because they've been trained to be like so pro donor, right? Yeah, well, the donors dangle those $1 million checks before them, and they're going to perform whatever is necessary to make sure the check clears.
Yeah, and for me, the worst part is the climate change part, because it's like I don't know how long we have.
Yeah, I need to get going kind of soon. So
Okay. Doug, what are you working? Let me just ask the last two questions. What are you currently working on right now?
well, my obsession now is the state of the American ruling class. So I've been talking some about that. I hope to turn the piece I did for Jacobin earlier this year into a book. But
oh, nice.
Sometimes I lack work discipline, so I need to get down and actually do that.
Okay. So what is the state of the American ruling class, just real quickly?
It's rotten. It is, if you look back at the mid-20th century U.S. ruling class, it was certainly committed to imperial power and was very brutal in its own way, but it was capable of thinking and planning in the longer term. I think what we have now is a class that is just into smashing and looting and very nihilistic, not interested in building much of anything, and just wants to accumulate as much money in the shortest time that it can. And I think we're seeing that now. The only things that they care about right now, it seems to be, don't tax me and don't regulate me, and the rest of the world can go to hell, as far as I'm concerned.
And is this a natural byproduct of capitalism, in your opinion, or is this just a?
Yeah, I guess to some degree it is. I mean, I think they've gotten so much richer than they were in the mid-20th century. If you look back at the fortunes of the mid-20th century, the ways that CEOs were paid, the way that even Wall Street was paid, nothing compared to the present. There just weren't billionaires. And now, I think the Forbes 400 list now consists entirely of billionaires. The first time Forbes did his 400 list, there were a couple of billionaires. It was mostly, people with 100 million. I mean, and certainly there's inflation over time, and 100 million is still a lot of money, but there's just so much more money at the top now than there was then, that it creates a deep cynicism, but also a very defensive approach to everything. They don't want any slight encroachment on their wealth and power, and they will go to any lengths to prevent that from happening. And they're willing to watch the earth burn, as far as they're concerned, and societies implode as long as they still have their billions to play with. I don't know what they think it's going to mean, what those billions will mean if society falls apart. They won't be able to buy very much with it. They're building their bunkers for the apocalypse. But when they get out, what's going to be there? They won't have any, they won't have servants. Their private jets won't be able to get fueled. So I really, there's a deep childishness among the American elite now that I think is destroying the world. And you contrast it with the Chinese ruling class, which is certainly brutal. It's certainly not necessarily very democratic, but they really do have the capability to plan for the long term, and are really just a lot more competent at what they're doing than ours is. And it's just visible in every way.
Okay. So one last question. It seems like it reminds me a lot of like the Habsburgers towards the end, where they were completely incompetent and just incapable of even putting up. Like this was the case.
Or the Romanovs. I mean, or
the Romanovs, yeah.
There's a great passage in Trotsky of describing Nicholas as an utter mediocrity.
Actually, it's funny because 2 years before he became king, his dad, they said, oh, maybe Nicholas should take over the transportation portfolio. And his dad was like, Nicky? Oh my God, he's just a boy. He can't handle it. So it seems like I do see a decay, or at least they're not. Things have been a lot easier for me, like in regards to, is this there's less of an effort to hide the ball, I guess.
In what respect?
The
utter rot of American society?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I certainly feel that. On the one hand, I guess we kind of deserve it. But on the other, I live here, and people I love live here, and we have a capacity to do a lot of damage as we rot. So that part is very sad. So it's not a pretty picture. I was a little more hopeful a year or two ago, but now it just seems like inertia and rot and greed are really asserting the upper hand.
Me too. I was a lot more hopeful a few years ago, but I've gotten more and more cynical. And yeah, it is it's like a big monster that can't, it's like a big Titanic, it can't steer easily, it can't go back, it can't change directions and it's just headed towards the iceberg.
Yeah, and it's just taking on water.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And please come back when you finish your book.
Yes, well, thanks for having me. I don't know if I finish my book. That could be sometime after eternity, but I'll do my best. Okay. But thanks for having me. Good talking with you.
Yep, same here. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Vladimir Ilyich came to St. Petersburg in the autumn of 1893, but I did not get to know him until some time later. Comrades told me that a very erudite Marxist had arrived from the Volga. Afterwards, I was given a pretty well-thumbed copybook on markets to read. The manuscript set forth the views of technologist Hermann Krassin, our St. Petersburg Marxist on the one hand, and those of the newcomer from the Volga on the other. The copybook was folded down the middle, and on one side H.B. Krassin had set forth his views in a scrawly hand with many crossing outs and insertions, while on the other side the newcomer had written his own remarks and objections in a neat hand without any alterations. The question of markets interested all of us young Marxists very much at the time. A definite trend had begun to crystallize among St. Petersburg Marxist study circles at that time. The gist of it was this: the process of social development appeared to the representatives of this trend as something mechanical and schematic. Such an interpretation of social development dismissed completely the role of the masses, the role of the proletariat. Marxism was stripped of its revolutionary dialectics, and only the bare phases of development remained. Today, of course, any Marxist would be able to refute that mechanistic conception, but at that time it was a cause of grave concern to our St. Petersburg Marxist circles. We were still poorly grounded theoretically, and all that many of us knew of Marx was the first volume of Capital. As for the Communist Manifesto, we had never even set our eyes on it, so it was more by instinct than anything else that we felt this mechanistic view to be the direct opposite of real Marxism. The question of markets had a close bearing on the general question of understanding Marxism. Exponents of the mechanistic view usually approach the question in a very abstract way. Since then, more than 30 years have passed. Unfortunately, the copy of the book has not survived, and I can only speak about the impression which it made on us. The question of markets was treated with ultra-concreteness by our new Marxist friend. He linked it up with the interest of the masses, and in his whole approach, one sensed just that live Marxism which takes phenomena in their concrete surroundings and in their development. One wanted to make the closer acquaintance of this newcomer to learn his views at first hand. I did not meet Vladimir Ilyich until Shrovetide. It was decided to arrange a conference between certain St. Petersburg Marxists and the man from the Volga at the flat of the engineer Klassen, a prominent St. Petersburg Marxist whom I had attended the same study circle 2 years before. The conference was disguised as a pancake party. Beside Vladimir Ilyich, there was Klassen, Y.P. Karabko, Serebovsky, S.I. Radchenko, and others. Patresov and Struve were to have been there, but I don't think they turned up. I particularly remember one moment. The question came up as to what ways we should take. Somehow general agreement was lacking. Someone, I believe it was Shevlyagin, said that work on the illiteracy committee was one of great importance. Vladimir Ilyich laughed. His laughter sounded rather harsh. I never heard him laugh that way again. Well, if anybody wants to save the country by working in the illiteracy committee, he said, let them go ahead. It should be said that our generation had witnessed its youth fight between the Narodovolotsi and Tsarism. We had seen how liberals, at first sympathetic about everything, had been scared into sticking their tail between their legs after the suppression of Narodnaya Volya Party, and had begun to preach of doing little things. Lenin's sarcastic remark was quite understandable. He had come to discuss ways of fighting together, and he had to listen instead to an appeal for the distribution or the illiteracy committee's pamphlets. Later, when we got to know each other better, Vladimir Ilyich told me one day how this liberal society had reacted to the arrest of his elder brother Alexander Ulyanov. All the acquaintances had shunned the Ulyanov family, and even an old teacher who until then had come almost every evening to play chess had left off calling. Simbirsk had no railway at that time, and Vladimir Ilyich's mother had to travel to Suzran by horse-drawn vehicle in order to catch the train to St. Petersburg, where her son was imprisoned. Vladimir Ilyich was sent to find a way companion for her, but no one wanted to be seen with the mother of an arrested man. This general cowardice, Vladimir Ilyich told me, had shocked him profoundly at the time. This youthful experience undoubtedly affected his attitude towards the so-called liberal society. He knew the true worth of all liberals' rants at an early age. No agreement was reached at the pancake party, of course. Vladimir Ilyich spoke little and was occupied in studying the company. People who called themselves Marxists felt uncomfortable under his steady gaze. I remember as we were returning from the Akhta district along the banks of the Neva, I first heard the story of Vladimir Ilyich's brother, a member of the Narodnaya Volya, who took part in the attempt on the life of Alexander III in 1887 and died at the hands of the Tsarist executioners before he had even come of age. Vladimir Ilyich had been very fond of his brother. They had many tastes in common. Both liked to be left alone for long periods of time to be able to concentrate. They usually lived together, and at one time they shared a separate wing of the house. When any of the young crowd dropped in, they had numerous cousins, boys and girls. The brothers would greet them with their pet phrase, "Honor us with your absence." They were both hard workers and revolutionary-minded. The difference in their age, though, made itself felt in various ways. There were certain things that Alexander did not tell Vladimir, and this is what Vladimir Ilyich told me. His brother was a naturalist. On his last summer vacation at home, he was preparing a dissertation on the Annelida and was busy all the time with his microscope. To get all the light he could, he got up at daybreak and started to work at once. No, my brother won't make a revolutionary, I thought at that time. Vladimir Ilyich related. A revolutionary can't give so much time to the study of worms. It was not long before he saw his mistake. The fate of his brother undoubtedly influenced Vladimir Ilyich profoundly. Another important factor was that he had begun to think for himself on many questions and had decided in his own mind the necessity of revolutionary struggle. Had this not been so, his brother's fate would probably have caused him deep sorrow only, or at most aroused in him a resolve and striving to follow in his brother's footsteps. As it was, the fate of his brother gave his mind a keener edge, developed in him an extraordinary soberness of thought, an ability to face the truth without letting himself for a minute be carried away by a phrase or an illusion. It developed in him a scrupulously honest approach to all questions. In the autumn of 1894, Vladimir Ilyich read the Friends of the People to our inner circle. I remember how it had thrilled all of us. The aims of the struggle were set forth in the pamphlet with admirable clarity. Hectograph copies of it circulated from hand to hand under the name of yellow copybooks. They were unsigned, fairly widely read. They undoubtedly had a strong influence on the Marxist youth at the time. When I was in Poltava in 1896, P.P. Rumyantsev, who was then an active social democrat just released from prison, described the Friends of the People as the best and most powerful and complete formulation of the standpoint of the revolutionary social democracy. In the winter of 1894 to 1895, I got more closely acquainted with Vladimir Ilyich. He was lecturing the Workers' Study Circle in the Nevskaya Zastava district, where I had been working for over 3 years as a teacher in the Smolenskaya Sunday evening school for adults, and therefore pretty familiar with the life on the Schusselburg Post Road. Quite a number of workers who attended Vladimir Ilyich's circles were pupils of my Sunday school. Among them, Babushkin, Borovkov, Gribakin, Bodrovs, Arseny, and Philip, and Zhukov. In these days, the Sunday evening school offered an excellent opportunity for studying everyday working class life, labor conditions, the temper of the masses. The Smolenskaya school had 600 pupils, not counting the evening technical class and the women's and Abukov schools attached to it. The workers, I must say, had full trust in their school mistresses. The dour-looking watchman of the Gromyov timber yards, for instance, told his teacher with a beaming face that a son had been born to him. A consumptive mill worker wished his teacher a bonny fiancé for having taught him to read and write. Another workman, a member of a religious sect who had been seeking God all his life, wrote with satisfaction that not until the last Holy Week he had learned from Rudakov, another pupil, that there wasn't any God at all, and this made him feel so good because the worst thing in the world was being a slave of God. You just had to grin and bear it, whereas being a slave of a man was much easier. At least you could fight back. Then there was a tobacco worker who used to get dead drunk every Sunday and was so saturated with the smell of tobacco that it made you dizzy to stand near him. He wrote in the scrawl, leaving out most of the vowels, that they had picked up a girl of 3 in the street. She was living in their artel, but they would have to give her up to the police, which was a shame. One-legged soldier came saying that Mikhail, you chap taught last. A one-legged soldier came saying that Mikhail, the chap you taught last year, has gone and done himself in with overwork. And before he died, he asked to be remembered by you and to wish you a long life. A textile worker who stood up fiercely for the Tsar and the priest gave warning to beware of that dark chap over there. He's always hanging out. Gorochkaya. A textile worker who stood up fiercely for the Tsar and priest gave warning to beware of that dark chap over there. He's always hanging about Gorokovaya Street. An elderly workman argued that he could not chuck up his church warden's job because it made me sick to see the way the priests are fooling the people, and somebody's got to show them up. As for the church, he wasn't struck on it a bit. He cottoned to that phases of development stuff perfectly well, so on and so forth. Workers who belonged to the organization went to school to get to know people and single out those who could be drawn into the circles and organizations. As far as these workers were concerned, the teachers were no longer just featureless set of women. They were already able to distinguish the extent to which this or that teacher was politically well-grounded. If they recognized a school teacher to be one of us, they let her know it by some phrase or word. For instance, in discussing the handicraft industry, a man would say, "A handicraft worker cannot compete with large-scale production." Or he would ask a poser like, "What is the difference between a St. Petersburg worker and an Arkhangelsk peasant?" After that, he would have a special look for that teacher or would greet her in a special way, as much to say, "You're one of us, we know." If anything was doing locally, they immediately told the teacher about it, knowing that it would be passed on to the organization. It was a sort of tacit understanding. As a matter of fact, we could talk about anything at school. Although there was a class that didn't... As a matter of fact, we could talk about almost anything at school, although there was hardly a class that did not have a police spy in it. If only you avoided dreadful words such as czar and strike and so on, you could touch on fundamental issues. Officially, of course, we were forbidden to talk about whatever. One day, the recapitulation group was shut down because an inspector on a surprise visit had been... One day, the recapitulation group was shut down because an inspector on a surprise visit had discovered that decimals were being taught, whereas the syllabus only allowed for 4 rules of arithmetic. I lived in Staronevsky Street at that time. It had a building that had a through courtyard, and Vladimir Ilyich used to drop in on Sundays after his circle work. We would start endless conversations. I was in love with my schoolwork and could talk about it for hours if you did not stop me. Talk about schools, the pupil, the Semyanikov, Thornton, Maxwell, and other factories and mills in the neighborhood. Vladimir Ilyich was interested in every detail that could help the Vladimir Ilyich was interested in every detail that could help him piece together a picture of the life and conditions of the workers to find some sort of avenue of approach to them in a matter of revolutionary propaganda. Most intellectuals those days did not know the workers well. An intellectual would come to one of our study circles and read the workers a kind of lecture. A manuscript translation of Engels' The Origin of Family, Private Property, and the State circulated among circles for a long time. Vladimir Ilyich read Marx's Capital to the workers and explained it to them. He devoted the second half of the lesson to questioning the workers about their work, conditions of labor, showing them the bearing which their life had on the whole structure of society, and telling them in what way the existing order could be changed. This linking of theory with practice was a feature of Vladimir Ilyich's work in the study circles. Gradually, other members of our circle adopted the same method. When the hectographed Wilna pamphlet on agitation appeared the following year, the soil had been fully prepared for agitation by leaflets. The thing was to make a start. The method of agitation based on the workers' everyday needs stuck deep root in our party work. I did not fully appreciate how efficacious this method was until years later when, living in France as a political emigrant, I observed how, during the great general strike of the postal workers in France, the French Socialist Party stood completely aloof from it. It was the business of trade unions, they said. In their opinion, the business of a party was only political struggle. They had no clear idea about whatever the necessity of combining the economic with the political struggle. Many of us comrades who worked in St. Petersburg at the time, seeing the effect this leaflet agitation had, were carried away by the work that they entirely forgot this was the forms. Many of the comrades who worked in the St. Petersburg at that time, seeing the effect this leaflet had on agitation, were so carried away by the work that they entirely forgot that this was one of the forms, but not the only form of work among the masses. It took the path of notorious economism. Vladimir Ilyich never forgot that there were other forms of work. In 1895, he wrote a pamphlet, An Explanation of the Law Concerning Fines Levied on the Workers in the Factories, in which he set a brilliant example of how to approach the average worker of that time, and proceeding from the workers' need to lead them step by step to the question of the necessity of the political struggle. Many intellectuals thought the pamphlet was dull and prolix, but the workers read it avidly, for it was something clear and familiar to them. It was printed at the Narodnaya Volya printing plant and distributed among the workers. At that time, Vladimir Ilyich had made a thorough study of the factory legislation. He believed that explaining these laws to the workers made it much easier to show them the connection that existed between their position and the political regime. Evidences of this study are traceable in quite a number of articles and pamphlets which Ilyich wrote at the time for workers, notably in the pamphlet New Factory Act and the articles on strikes and on industrial courts and others. As a result of this going about round the workers' circles, it was that the police kept a close watch on us. Of all our group, Vladimir Ilyich was the most experienced in secrecy methods of work. He knew the through yards and was a master hand at giving the sleuths the slip. He taught us how to use invisible ink and write messages in books by a dotted code and secret ciphers, and invented all kinds of aliases. One felt that he had been well schooled in Narodnaya Volya methods. Indeed, he had a good reason to speak with the greater respect he did for the old Narodovolyet Milyakov, nicknamed Dvornik janitor on the account that his first-rate secrecy technique. Meanwhile, the police surveillance kept on growing stricter and stricter, and Vladimir Ilyich insisted that a successor should be appointed, someone who was not being shadowed and who would take over all contacts. As I was the cleanest of them in the eyes of the police, it was decided to appoint me the successor. On Sunday of Easter, 5 or 6 of us went to Tsarskoye Selo to celebrate the holiday with Sylvan, a member of the group who used to live there as a coach. In the train going down, we pretended not to know each other. We sat nearly all discussing contacts that had to be kept going. Vladimir Ilyich taught us the use of cipher. We coded almost half a book. Afterwards, I am sorry to say I am unable to decipher this first attempt at collective coding. There was one consolation, though. By the time it had to be deciphered, most of the contacts no longer existed. Hi. Are we live? I guess.
You are live now. You're back live.
Okay,
Ashley.
well, I hope you guys enjoyed the first chapter of Nadezhda Remembers, and if you like it, I can narrate another chapter for next week. Let me know what you think in the comments or comments below, wherever else you let me know what you think. Do we have any questions? Let's see. Oh, thank you, Kevin Tui. Oh my God! Thank you so much, Jeannie, for the pancake party. Let's see. And somebody, Mr. Difficile, said Doug Henwood is right. Oh, thank you so much, Patrick Maynard. Lenin had great taste in librarians and wives. Librarians, actually, yeah. His wife was his librarian. Well, actually, thank you so much. Well, one of my favorite letters is when Lenin's, I believe he is the president of the Narsovcom or whatever that thing is. And he's writing to some weird librarian in some somewhere. I think it may be right outside of Moscow, but I could be wrong. And he's like, you have to keep the library hours open from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. or something like that. And I just find it really both adorable and don't you get to have a world war to fight or something like that? So it's kind of very funny that he has no control. Okay, so Aeola Stripped likes, yes, please. It's wonderful to hear the perspective of someone who had a distinct privilege. Okay, and then a comrade Zhao said he sent me something via Discord. Well, I will check that out. Okay, so I can continue with more chapters, and I'll try to make my voice less annoying to me, because I was getting annoyed by my voice, and most of the time I think it's an unfair criticism when people say that my voice is annoying, and it's too high-pitched. But I was getting annoyed, so I'm going to have to figure out how to make it less high-pitched and annoying. It may not be possible. Well, thank you to many. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? I want to run out. I want to run out of this burning building called the USA. Still recovering from smoke from the fires last year. Yeah, we all do. We all need to. Um, 10, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, anti-capitalist, nothing else to do. Okay, so Kevin asks a lot of good questions. How on earth do Americans think that their government's working for them when they don't get any donations from them in comparison to corporations? Well, it's kind of like somebody with an abusive daddy who's never had a good father. So they think having an abusive daddy is normal. So then they can't actually believe that there are people like or systems that create people like Lenin or Mao, where you have a father figure or a government that cares about you. Um, so yeah, I think one example, you don't even have to go to a communist country. I was working on this individual like I was helping lobby this like teenager who was actually he was released from prison last week, which has made me really happy. But Ali Al Nimr, but he was sentenced to death at age 16, and I was sending emails to all sorts of congressional people, and at age and I also sent me as an American sent letters to members of parliament in the United Kingdom. Guess what? I got a much more responsive response from the members of the UK Parliament than I ever did from any member of Congress. That's because Americans don't. That's like how unresponsive the US government is. But if you're not used to having a responsive government, you don't understand. Yeah, look at my pinned tweet. You'll see. I didn't want. I don't want to publicize it too much because I don't know what their family wants, whether they want privacy or they want to be happy, like whatever but look at the pinned tweet. He has come home and he hugs his mom, and that's all we ever wanted. I'm not an angel. um. So, but thank you though. I do appreciate the donations. I love that. I need it. So, yeah, so then they don't have a frame of reference of what an unresponsive government is versus a responsive government. So they think it's normal to never get an email back after writing to a congressional representative that they elected in their own district. While in the UK, even just the UK, which is also an imperial hellhole, at least you're supposed to get a response back from an MP, and I did get actually human responses back. So it is just a lack of perspective, and that's kind of how they. It's kind of like it's like a frog that's in boil. If this is the proper analogy, a frog that's in water, and you heat up the water a little bit at a time. If you put it on, if you put it on in a hot kettle, it will like jump out, right? But I don't know if this is a real analogy or if this is an urban legend analogy. But yeah, the yeah. Okay. So Patrick Maynard said, I love your talk about Tibet on Mango Press. It blew my mind. Well, read my article about Tibet where I go into detail from like 800 years of history, and I'll include the link, or we'll include the link as soon as I'm not talking. Comrade Zuzu said, talking about irresponsible government, when they showed up in China, all of them ended ugly. Yep. When the imperialists, yeah, showed up in China, all of them. Yeah, and well, I do want to go into more detail in that I found a lot of I found well, oddly enough, I need a native German speaker because I found the Ernst Schaefer film where so the problem is I've seen the National Geographic translation, but I don't 100% trust English translations of any language. So I would love to, if you speak German, I would love for you to listen to the Ernst Schaefer film and see what they got. Um, so yeah, Patrick Maynard said, yeah, it blew my mind. I mean, feudal Tibet is a harsh place. Um, it always was and it always is, I guess. And yes, China has been dealing with Tibet since the Tang Dynasty, correct. Ah, Gore Vidal said this about the frog and the civil rights. Okay. I knew it was the proper analogy, and that's why, okay, well, Askaran, can you tweet it out to Janet if you're fluent in German and English? And I'm going to send you the link to the Ernst Schaefer film. So, okay, so awesome. Anyways, let's see. Yeah, feudal Tibet is a harsh. I don't know what to. People, it's like people have a weird impression that Buddhism is immune from, I don't know, normal societal pressures, but it's not. It's just like every other society. So they kind of get surprised that feudal Tibet's like a lot like the Wahhabi system. Like they literally would cut off arms and legs for like larceny. It was a lot like the Wahhabis were. Like the feudal Tibetan version of Buddhism was a lot like the Wahhabi version of Islam. So I don't know how else to explain this about Tibet, but it is very hard. And I've put up some videos on TikTok where I actually take interviews with former serfs who talk about their experiences, and it's pretty tough stuff. So I understand. Let's see. Do we have anything else? Um, somebody said there's too much gore in every topic of feudal Tibet. It's like visiting documenting reality type sites. Yeah, it is very I mean, you have to understand that it was about 2% maybe of Tibet. According to the OSS film, all of the wealth in Tibet was concentrated in 20 families. That's not a lot. And there were maybe 1 million people in Tibet. So, and 20 families is, I don't even know how many people that is, but that's not a lot of people. So you have to have a lot of violence to uphold such a long, such a unequal system for such a long period of time. Um, so yeah, it is very hard to deal with because yes. Okay, well, okay, so we want to talk about it on Monday, and be sure to join us for Mondays with Mao, with Comrade Zoo at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And yeah, we can talk about Tibet at 9 a.m. Monday. That'll be fun. Still not, okay. Patrick Maynard, I will have to just tweet it out afterwards because it seems like we can't send a link via YouTube. Mr. Piece of Work, around 600 people. Is that about 20 families? Um, yeah, I think that's probably around 20 families, yeah. Um, and you've never, Aeolus Drift said, you should see how American museums treated indigenous corpses. I've never seen so many skulls lined on shelves like ornaments. Yeah. And it's actually kind of the disdain for human corpses, I guess, is a well, not all human corpses, I guess, but for a certain segment of society seems to be universal in the way I guess humans deal with exterminating other people. I don't know. But yeah, I've seen like it seems to run across many cultures where they do that. And Comrade Zoo said, no matter what, even if it was just 200 families, I would not call it just. Yeah, it was not even close to being just. It was like horrific. This guy, I've seen a video of this guy getting blinded for allegedly losing sheep that belonged to the manor lords. I mean, it was a horrific society, and you were at the whim of the feudal lord at all times. So yeah, it was probably frightening for a serf. And the life expectancy was, I believe, 32 or 36. I don't remember. Is it 32 or it was really low. And anyways, let's see. Well, do we have anything else to talk about? Let's see if I have any questions. Did I miss any? Oh, okay, somebody said on Western Anthropology's Inhumanity, look up Sarah Sarthiji Bartman, trigger warning. And actually, it's exciting. We just recorded an interview with Chris Knight, who wrote about bloodlines. And okay, bloodlines, and yeah, he talks about how race, like often anthropology was very race or hierarchy justifying. Theo 625 asks, was Jonestown an MK Ultra experiment? We actually interviewed some survivors of Jonestown in an earlier episode. Check that out, and they don't think it was an MK Ultra experiment, all of it. And I guess that's all I have to say. Genie, do you want to talk Donziger? Yes, of course. He was the attorney for the indigenous group from Ecuador that was suing Chevron for basically destroying their lands and committing genocide and whatnot. Well, after the case, they got him on this like really strange, almost like a bullshit like ethical violation, but then they arrested him again based on like it's basically nuance cooking. What it is that like if you're a liberal and you want to okay, so if you're a liberal and you want to and you want to basically go la 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 la, you can with this excuse, but allegedly what it was he was first disbarred, and okay, so he was disbarred, which was insane, and he, um, he was like only yeah, okay, he even had an ankle bracelet, yeah, so that was really gross, but yeah, it was basically the lawyer, like Chevron, just went crazy and they just kind of dug under everything they could, and basically it was bullshit. U.S. then negating the possibility of wrenching the money. Oh my God, finding that Donziger conducted a pattern of racketeering activity under statutes common. Oh my God, this is total bullshit. Okay, sorry. I did not read the whole case. Now that I'm reading it, it's like total bullshit. Okay, yeah. So what happened is that Chevron, basically, it's, you know how there are these like federalist societies that just kind of like cultivate judges and stuff like that. Well, it also represents a lot of like relationships and incest going on between law firms and whatnot. And yeah, so basically Chevron has infinite amount of money, so they probably hired a lot of some private eye or private detective to go through everything. And if you like the way the American legal system is that if you scrutinize anyone that much, you will find something that you can actually charge them with because you're just scrutinizing them that much. And the legal system's crazy. So that's kind of what happened to him. Is that's what it looks like, because the whole thing sounds like bullshit BS to me. So it's definitely some sort of like paperwork. I mean, I don't like, why would first of all, like, why would indigenous people have an incentive to bribe somebody for 500? I mean, that doesn't make sense. If we, like, you're not going to win the money struggle with Chevron, they're going to win this. And so none of this makes sense other than the fact that they probably vindictively paid some like detectives or some private investigator to just go through his garbage and go through everything and find something to uh, uh, fry him with. And yeah, that's sad, unfortunately. And I don't know what else to say besides that's being really sad. And I hope he comes home soon. Um, well, thank you so much, Jean Jeannie. Happy Halloween. Uh, Well, somebody asked me if I am planning on making an episode of what is happening in Sudan. Well, I would if I could find a good guest who knows what's going on in Sudan, and I don't feel comfortable. Like I feel comfortable in saying, oh, like don't trust this newspaper because it's funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, but I would not feel comfortable going through all the intricacies of a nation state. So I would, I guess, I'm always on the hunt. So somebody asked me a few months ago to do an episode about Myanmar, and I said I did not know back then. I just said I honestly did not know where to start. And then I believe Neil Sanger gave me the recommendation of Angelo Giuliano and Brian Berlectic, and I looked at them and I spoke to them, and I really they gave me a really good clear picture, and they both had lived in the area for a while. They've visited Myanmar. They've known a lot of people, and they had a good grasp of the culture, and they really knew what they were talking about. So then I had them on. So if you know anybody from Sudan or who studies Sudan or who's very trustworthy on Sudan, well, let me know, and I would love to interview them and have them on. So, okay, well, put it in the comments below if you know of somebody, and I will check them out. Let's see, do we have anything else? A felony a day. Yeah, that is basically, if the cops scrutinize you that much, yes, they will totally. I mean, like things like, I don't know, like if you don't have your fingerprints. I mean, there are thousands of things. And if you're a lawyer, like if you don't have like 1,000 aides to do. Okay, if you're a lawyer for Chevron, you'll have 1,000 aides and 1,000 paralegals and secretaries to make sure that you are dotting your T's and crossing your I's and you haven't improperly signed something and this and that and that. But if you're a lawyer for the indigenous people, you're not going to have that infinite number of staff to ensure compliance. So, yeah. it means that if they scrutinize your paperwork, they'll always find something. Yeah, and this is life. This is the way um, hegemony is kept under capitalism is through, yeah. Yeah, Brian is from New Atlas, and I've done an episode with him. It's called "What is the Color?" No, the one with Angelo is "What is the color of your revolution?" and the one with Brian is a pun on Milk Tea Alliance. So we talk a little bit about Thailand and Myanmar and what the U.S. is doing. So yeah, just check it out. Let's see, do we have anything else? Mm, I guess not. I I have two things in the works that I'm thinking about. YouTube can be deleting all your comments. I don't know. Okay, the first thing is I think we need to have I guess, a regular update on Belt and Road initiatives, projects, how it's coming, and because a lot of people, I guess, don't seem to have object permanency. And this week we've dealt with that. And I still don't understand why, like, suddenly, like, Tibet and, like, all this the basketball player. Okay, got it. Um, so, for example, when people are like, "Oh, Chinese imperialism is the same," or whatever nonsense, I have to show them, look, there. China said that they were gonna build a train from Nairobi to no, sorry, yeah, Nairobi to Mombasa and back, and they actually completed it, and it cut down people's travel time, so they just delivered what they promised. That is not what the US or Britain's ever done. And so, like, things like that. So I'm thinking about that. Yes, Mr. I interviewed comrade rapper Jianzhu. There's two episodes about Taiwan in Historically Podcast. Yeah, it was great. We go through all of the history, like we go through the past 100 years of history of Taiwan. It is fantastic. Um, but yeah, it's called Between a Rock and a Hard Place, as in Republic of China. Here, I'll put the link down. I hope you can see the link. I don't know who can see it and who cannot. And there are two parts to this. So we've done this. And what you realize is that Taiwan was under Japanese imperialism for about, let's see, till about 1945. And then well, China couldn't after the Chinese Civil War, the losers in the Civil War just kind of ran away to Taiwan. But China didn't really have a navy or an air force actually to be able to get back Taiwan. So it was always a plan one day. But and Taiwan, it's a complicated. I mean, there's a lot of things that a lot of Americans, it wouldn't occur to a lot of Americans to even think about all these things. So there's like the different kinds of Taiwanese people. I mean, there's a different kinds of like Han people who, depending on when they immigrated there. There's a lot of conflating. I mean, there's a lot going on in Taiwan that most people will not want to spend the effort to understand. um, okay, so, and it takes a lot of effort. Indigenous, yeah, it takes a lot of effort to kind of write. Um, no, that's a different kind of. I'm sorry. Yes, we talk about that. Okay, is there? Okay, I'm getting a little tired, so I'm gonna. Well, join us. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, and please go to historically. That's substack.com, And also be sure to share this link and recommend this, because word of mouth is the best way to get this. And you have to literally, you can't just share the link on Facebook. You have to be like, you have to bug them, and you be like, you have to watch this. You please watch this. Please watch this. Like, send them a private message and really, really bug them and be persistent. Like, pretend that it's your channel. And hopefully we'll get more people, and eventually maybe we'll have enough people that we can have conversations again with semi-literate people who kind of know what they're talking about. That's my goal. To have conversations with semi-literate people, to be able to have a conversation with semi-literate people who kind of know what they're talking about is the goal for this country, I guess, for now. Baby steps. Okay, there's some BS being thrown around concerning that on what is it concerning? Oh, thank you, gracias, Mr. Difficile. Thank you so much. That's so sweet. Okay, there's some BS being thrown around on, what is the BS being thrown around on the online left? I don't know. Are we I don't even care. Taiwan, yeah, ignore them. Generally, Janet clipped that for the historically ad. What was the... Okay, Janet listened to them and clipped that for the historically ad. So, yeah. Anyways, with that, I will say Slobodu narodu I smrti fašizmu.